Welcome. I see we have participants coming in. We'll just give it 30 seconds before we get started. Welcome to everyone that's coming in. We're just going to give it a few more seconds and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we'll get started. So welcome to today's webinar on science-based targets for forest, land and agriculture, the FLAG sectors. My name's Leonie Goodwin and I'm a programs coordinator at UN Global Compact Norway. For those of you who are joining today who don't know the UN Global Compact, we're the world's biggest initiative for sustainability and business with over 20,000 participating companies. All of our participating companies commit to progressing the 10 principles covering environment, human rights, labour rights and anti-corruption. And we support our participants to achieve this, to work towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So today's webinar is the third and the last in a series the climate teams in the Nordic networks are hosting around dilemmas in science-based climate action. And these webinars are intended to launch 3 briefs that we developed together with Ramble on important topics that many of our participating companies are grappling with around science-based climate action. The 3 briefs emerged from a larger project where we ran peer learning groups. We brought together around 60 leading Nordic companies to discuss these 3 topics. And we convened peer learning groups in November last year. And with support from the Nordic Council of Ministers, we were able to engage Ramble to facilitate those and also produce briefs. But in addition, we also were able to provide feedback to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Science-Based Targets Initiative from these companies. So just to have a look at today's agenda, shortly I'm going to be handing over to our subject matter expert, Shane Hughes from Ramble, who'll set the scene and quickly run through the briefing. And then we'll hear from our guest speakers from AAK and Orkla, who will share where they're on their FLAG journey. And then we'll move into an interactive discussion around the challenges that emerged in the brief and how our guest companies are working with them. We're hoping to leave enough time for questions, and I encourage you please to use the Q&A function to post questions. That you can find that at the bottom of your screen with the Q&A icon. And I'll also just point out that you can upvote questions. So, in case we run out of time, if there's something you'd really like an answer to, please upvote and we can try to prioritise that. The recording and slides will be sent out afterwards. And we'll also encourage you, we've got some a really amazing group of participants on the call today. So if you can, rename your Zoom name and pop your company name in there so people can see, who we've got on the call. So just now, I'm really delighted to welcome our 3 fantastic speakers. We've got a combination of subject matter expertise from Shane Hughes from Ramble, as I said, and real hands-on experience and expertise from our guest speakers. So Shane is the Director of Corporate Net Zero Services at Ramble, and he's got over 25 years experience working with decarbonisation strategies for corporates. He's led pilot testing of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol's land sector and removals guidance for Ramble, and has also been an expert advisor to the Science-Based Targets Initiative on a sectoral decarbonisation approach. Caroline Westerich Sicking from AAK as the Director of Sustainability. She leads the Global Sustainability Strategy and Sustainable Sourcing Strategy and Programs. And she's been working on responsible material supply chains and sustainability in different businesses, including Cargill, Unilever, Sara Lee and Philips, for close to 15 years. And finally, Lars Lundahl from Orkla has been working with climate and environmental issues since the 90s, starting at Lund University, and then in the packaging and food industry. And in his current role as environmental manager at Orkla, which is split 50-50 between Orkla Foods Sweden and Orkla ASA, an industrial investment company, he leads Scope 3 and flag target setting and develops strategies to strengthen Orkla's work related to nature and biodiversity. So now, Shane, I'll hand over to you to set the scene. Thanks.
Sorry, I just had a pop-up appear on my computer just as I was trying to unmute. Thank you, Leonie, for the introduction. I'm going to quickly, as Leonie said, set the scene, look at some of the background context, and then move as fast as possible into the discussions with Caroline and Lars as we discuss some of the real challenges that I'm sure many of you are facing. Next slide, please. So a quick introduction to Ramboll for those who have not come across us. We're a sustainability consultancy. We've got a significant footprint around the world, 300 offices across the globe and 18,000 experts. You can see across the bottom there, I'm not going to read them one by one, but there's lots of different initiatives, including the UN Global Compact that we've been signatories to since 2007. And we tend to fare really quite well in terms of the top percentile in terms of our sustainability performance. So it's important that we're walking the talk, but it's also important that we deliver services to the flag sector, carbon accounting, product footprinting. We've got a nature-based solution team. We've got an AI-driven kind of geospatial software for looking at deforestation. And our engineers can build and design a factory for a flag-related production facility. So next slide, please. In terms of setting the scene, one of the key messages, and I'm hoping this is already well and truly understood throughout the audience, but it's always important to reiterate this, and that is the importance of flag to our global journey of decarbonising and mitigating the worst of climate change. And you can see there in the kind of green segment of the pie there, significant, often kind of 18 to 20% is accounted for in terms of the flag sectors, but you've got that green dotted line there. And that's when we increase the quantity of impact that the flag sectors have when we start to include things such as removals and the capacity for flag sectors to support in terms of sequestering carbon. So it's a huge impact, and it's quite frankly, we can't meet our climate goals without the flag sectors fully on board. Next slide, please. Another kind of setting the scene in terms of context. Most people, I think, when they automatically think about flag sectors, they think about a landowner or a farmer or somebody working the land. And actually, when we've done some analysis of science-based targets related signatories, and yes, there are some supply side companies there. There's about 250 of those, but really it's an inverted pyramid in terms of the kind of midstream companies make up a big proportion, but then also the retailers, the fast moving goods companies, the food and beverage companies, those companies that are on the demand side make up a significantly greater number of companies who are dealing with flag emissions. So the challenge is actually the emissions are occurring on the land. So the big proportion of emissions are supply side, and that's where we look to make changes. But in reality, the companies grappling with this tend to be on the demand side. Next slide, please. I'm going to just quickly go through this. On the left here, you can see the GHG protocol for fossil fuels was launched in 2001. On the right, you can see we still don't have a finalized document for GHG protocol for the land sector removal guidance. And it's just I just wanted to indicate that because it feels like the sector's been somewhat overlooked, and we're really trying to catch up in terms of our emissions calculations. And we're going to see through the discussions that that's a huge challenge. I hope the underlying message is put the challenge to one side, get stuck in, let's find ways to decarbonize. Let's not use the uncertainties and the complexities as a reason for us to not decarbonize. Next slide, please. Just kind of setting out the scenes of the introductory briefing itself. The briefing tries to summarize some of the flag and related and land sector removal guidance related requirements, key principles, criteria, etc. But then it dives into these segments of challenges and recommendations. The briefing's only 10 pages long, and I think to fully answer those challenges and recommendations, we need hundreds of pages. So we've got challenges and recommendations identified as carbon accounting, data collection, target setting, and value chain engagement. What we've tried to do with the briefing is, where possible, we've identified further resources. So it's a really good place to find signposting. If, for example, at the end of the webinar, you've still got questions, I recommend looking at the briefing. So just a quick comment on the format today. We're going to look at those challenges. Caroline and Lars are on the front line dealing with those challenges, and it's going to be great to hear their experiences as they work their way through those challenges. Next slide, please. So handing over to Caroline. Next slide.
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. And we can move to the next slide immediately for a short introduction on AAK. Many people don't know us because we are a midstream company, as we call ourselves, but we are a multi-ingredient house processing vegetable oils and fats, plant-based oils and fats for many different applications, like chocolate and confectionery, bakery, but also plant-based foods applications. Sustainability is a true part of our strategy. As you see, our purpose is making better happen, and for us, sustainability is directly connected to our purpose. From a strategic point of view, next to focusing on the growth, further encompassing our specialization journey, we aim to have a positive impact on the people that we work with, on customers, but also being recognized for our positive impact related to everything we do. Globally, we have about 4,000 employees, about 50 billion SEK net sales, and about 20 production facilities supported by customer innovation centers. So overall, quite a broad spread in what we do. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you see our position in the value chain. And that also, especially related to what we talk about today, sort of shows the impact that we can have as a company. On one side, we are directly connected to the raw materials that we are sourcing. We hardly do any direct sourcing from plantations or farmers. We have some direct sourcing programs, but the majority that we buy is from mills, crushers, refineries in the different origin countries across the different plant-based oils and fats raw materials that we are sourcing. And our downstream footprint, so to say, is connected to the consumer good companies that are using our ingredients as part of their final product that in the end are going to be distributed to retailers and are being consumed by the consumers. So overall, our position in the supply chain is really midstream. Next slide, please. We have been on the climate journey since 2019, when we really established the first time our carbon footprint or greenhouse gas footprint as a company, as a global company. And we have also chosen 2019 as the base year for the science-based targets. We signed the science-based target commitment letter in 2020. But it took until 2023 until we submitted this SBTi targets in total. In first instance, we've been working on the development of decarbonization roadmaps because we really wanted to have an understanding of, if we set targets, we want to make sure that we are able to make it happen. And then, of course, when it was end of 2022 and we were ready to submit our SBTIs, the flag guidance was not ready yet. And we also wanted to be able to include our flag targets, as scope 3 for AAK is more than 90% of our footprint, and flag is 65% of that part. So it's quite a significant part, and we said, well, if we do it, let's do it from the beginning well. And that is also why it took until 2023 for the submission of our targets, and they were approved just before Christmas, so early December. So it shows a little bit our journey from, let's say, the first baseline assessment of our greenhouse gas footprint globally until the submission of the targets and the approval by SBTI. Then our nearby targets are towards 2030 and have been approved. But it shows the scope of our work, but also the time it takes to submit, to go through the process, to make sure everyone in the organization is aligned and feels comfortable. Yes, we don't know exactly everything yet, but we are going to make it happen. And that is how we've gone through the process.
Okay, hello, Lars. I'm continuing with Orkla. So next slide, please. So quick introduction to Orkla. We are an industrial investment company focusing on brands and consumer-oriented businesses. And as you see to the right, more than 70% is related to food. So that's why we are in the flag business as well. We have around 300 brands, and these brands are more well known than the company Orkla. We have a heavy presence in the Northern Europe, but we are also present in other parts of Europe, in India and other countries. We have around 20,000 employees, and as you can see to the left, it's a very old company, Orkla. Next slide, please. So something about our journey linked to climate and the environment. First, to the left, plant-based food strategy. I think that's maybe one of the most important things we could do to help reduce impact on the climate and the environment overall, to help increase the share of plant-based food. Moving on specifically to science-based targets, we had our first targets approved in 2018 for scopes 1, 2, 3. For sure, scope 3 is the most challenging and where we have also more than 90% of our impact. So we saw the need to enhance our activities there. And in 2021, we established a cross-functional implementation strategy. We also enhanced the supplier engagement a lot, asking questions to our suppliers about data, actions, and asking for collaboration, and starting some very interesting initiatives. In 2021, we also joined the Science-Based Targets Network to work more intensively with nature and biodiversity and seeing the links between climate and nature. And in 2022, we got our net zero target validated by SBTI, and our target year is 2045. And then last year, we started our flag project, and we are about to submit our application for new scope 3 targets actually next week. Next slide.
Thanks, Lars. I'll pick it up from here. So introducing again the challenges, the next section, we're going to structure it looking at these 4 challenges. Of course, they're not siloed challenges, they're interconnected challenges. And And for example, the word value chain engagement, you could replace it with how are we really going to decarbonize? So yeah, this is how we've kind of framed the challenges in the briefing. So next slide, please. You can see on the left-hand side here, the list of challenges that we've identified. These are the key challenges actually that came out of the peer learning sessions that Leonie introduced earlier. And so these were the ones that were really top of mind for those professionals, sustainability professionals that we spoke to and facilitated the peer learning. Because the guidance, the introductory briefing that we've authored is so short and it's concise and that's the way it was designed to be, we've as I said, signposted lots of information. So you can see the green dots there where there's a challenge, and we've also signposted additional information. We've kind of identified this with a green dot. We recommend you go and have a look at that, and also feel free to read the text on here. I won't go into detail reading line by line each piece of text. I think I'll just kind of summarize the big challenge for me in terms of carbon accounting, for example, is actually it's really complicated. There's hundreds of pages of documents that are kind of describing land use change, for example, a really complicated subject matter. And actually that complexity and that uncertainty, and some of the documents aren't finalized. That uncertainty is causing, the worst thing that it could do is cause a kind of procrastination around decarbonisation. I think that's the point that we need to shift through the gears really quickly. So I'll hand straight to Caroline to discuss your experiences in the kind of carbon accounting and the challenges you faced and how you've overcome them.
Yes. Well, overall, I think it's indeed a complex process. We did the first time in 2019, as I described in the climate roadmap and journey that we've been on. And in 2023, we set up our first carbon accounting in order to also being able to calculate the progress that we've made since 2019. One of the key challenges there is that we had identified a deforestation-free supply chain, because if you look at our supply base and our FLAG targets, as mentioned, 65% of our emissions is connected to FLAG, and those emissions are generated from palm, rapeseed, and coconut. So the majority of our raw materials, we've made a selection of the key raw materials to focus on. AAK already had a deforestation-free commitment, and for us, it is very relevant, of course, to focus on a deforestation-free commitment. We've put efforts in place to drive progress here and to make sure that as a company, we set up a deforestation-free supply chain. If you move to the next slide, I think you can see our progress since 2019. So when we started setting the targets with our baseline year, we had 26% of our palm volumes that was considered deforestation free. And that was basically only the share that was RSPO certified. To date, our 2023 numbers show an 83% volume of palm that is verified deforestation free. And we've been using a methodology, developing a methodology, also in close collaboration with suppliers, within the industry, obviously. And we want to be able to quantify the impact of deforestation free, obviously, on our FLAG progress. And that is not an easy one. So especially also since we discussed that the greenhouse gas protocol and the guidance on that part is not finalized yet. It's not easy to make the quantification of this impact. And for AAK, this is one of the key areas where we've been investing a lot in driving progress, where we also know that it's one of the key elements connected to reducing and preventing greenhouse gas emissions from happening in your supply chain. So this is one of the key challenges. How do we quantify the progress that we've made? And just for your information, I'm allowed to share this slide today because we are launching our sustainability report today. So the data is now in the public domain. So that was a nice coincidence with this webinar. But this is a key challenge, how to quantify. We will put in a lot of effort in order to make this happen, because we believe it is a significant impact factor in our mitigation strategy.
Excellent. Perhaps when we get to target setting, it'd be interesting to see how SBT responded to your calculations, because you talked about the complexity around those calculations, the difficulty. It'd be interesting maybe to look at that from a target setting perspective. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next challenge segment, and we're making good time, so that's a real positive. So data collection, a huge obvious challenge, and I think both Lars and Caroline are going to jump in and have some discussions around this, but it's a mix between getting disaggregated emissions factors, getting primary data, that supply chain engagement process, and for example, we put recommendations around here in terms of getting third-party verification, getting some rigor in that supply chain data, but it's got to be seen as a long-term process. That's not going to be something that you're going to solve overnight. Sometimes we get clients come to us and they ask us to tell them what's their carbon emissions in their supply chain, and we give them a number, but we say this is the level of uncertainty, and it's going to take us 2 years to really work through that uncertainty with your supply chain. And that's quite difficult for people to then say, we're going to set targets based on data with significant uncertainty. How can I confirm for sure that we can deliver those targets? And that's often a conversation that we're having at the boardroom level. So I'm going to hand to Lars to introduce the challenges that you faced.
Next slide, please. So some of the challenges will, if you maybe need to go on. So first of all, we have a huge amount of raw materials used for the products in Orkla, and we have more than 1,000 what we call sourcing categories. So just that is a huge challenge. And one very basic thing is that in the data from ERP systems and so on, not always have the unit in kilograms, but in maybe meters or pieces. So there is a lot of work also just to get volumes in kilograms to be able to use emission factors applied to kilograms. And avoid then to use spend as a way to extrapolate your impact. Also, within these sourcing categories, there are, agricultural commodities, but also to a large extent processed products, like, for example, rapeseed oil, like from AAK, for example. There is also a lot of ingredients composed of several raw materials. So just finding emission factors to cover all of that in a good way is a challenge. And we have, of course, data in the past, but with the flag, the challenge of segregating flag and non-flag emissions, and within a flag, segregating then the land management and the land use change emissions is quite a task. So to finding a database to cover that, and so that has been quite a big change. For example, in terms of land use change emissions, we only had on the high risk raw materials in the past, and now it's much more broadly applied. Origin of raw materials is another challenge, traceability, to really know where the raw materials are coming from, where the crops are grown, and so on. And then one important thing is also not just to focus on climate, but have databases that can cover also other environmental and nature-related metrics. Last point, increasing the use of supplier-specific data, I think, is extremely important, because if you will be able to track improvements with existing raw materials, existing suppliers. You need supplier-specific data. Otherwise, you can also only see changes between switching and changing your product recipe, switching ingredients or origins, but those actual improvements taking place in the supply chain where you need more specific data. So these are some of the challenges, or more than that as well.
Yeah, and maybe if I can add something on those challenges, indeed, the emission factors change over time. So even if you use existing databases, you will see that after a few years, new emission factors pop up, and you need to use those, but you also need to understand what has caused those changes, right? But also methodology differences. This is relatively new science still, so we need to adapt while we are going. I think that is also something that we come across more and more, and we need to live with some of the uncertainty that is actually happening, and make as much sense of it as possible at the moment in time. What we do in our rapeseed supply chain in Sweden specifically, we have started a partnership with Improving, where we are collecting emissions data directly from the farm, where we look at yield, having the traceability, the inputs, and the farm practices all monitored in a system. And that will give us better primary data, but also gives us an opportunity to identify the key hotspots that we need to work on together with the suppliers in our supply base, to address those in terms of our reduction target. So that's an example of what we are doing in rapeseed specifically.
Yeah, fantastic. And feel free, everybody, to put any questions into the chat that we can address towards the end, assuming we have time. But I really like that reflection in terms of this almost iterative approach. You start with a number, but then as the data and the emissions factors start to improve and your understanding of your supply chain improves, that number naturally changes. So maybe you need to recalculate your base year. And corporate entities are really uncomfortable putting numbers out into the public domain and then changing them. It doesn't traditionally look like a good, it looks like you didn't understand your numbers. Originally, you've made a mistake, but actually we need to kind of change that mindset. This is an iterative learning process that we're going through. And actually every time that you go back and recalculate your numbers, it's a positive step towards understanding your emissions and improvement of the sector as we go forwards. Next slide, please. Okay, so target setting, you can see there the challenges on the left that we've identified. Me and my team, we spend a huge amount of time looking at this, which is the best base year, which target year should we use, should we go for net zero, do we do 2040, do we do 2050, and that involves quite a lot of calculating multiple years at the beginning to see which base year would be the most appropriate. And ultimately, I think often the base year comes down to which year have you got good quality data. So it tends to be that you end up with the most recent year being decided. Maybe 8 times out of 10 clients work with the most recent year because of the quality of data. But then you've got a compressed timeline in terms of decarbonisation. You have to be looking 5 or 10 years in front in terms of your target year, and you've still got to be delivering the quantity of decarbonisation in that short time period. And that presents significant challenges. How are you going to step into decarbonising at that level? I'm going to hand to Lars, I believe, to Caroline, sorry, to introduce some of the challenges on target setting.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think some of the ones that you mentioned are exactly the ones that we've gone through in the process. I mean, we've started with a base year when we had the first greenhouse gas accounting done. We wanted to keep that here because it would allow us for time until our 2030 target. We selected a target that was near term because we felt more comfortable. It's also, I mean, it's much more connected to, well, if you really make a 2040 or 2050 target, you sort of put the responsibility to the people that come after you in the company. So for us, that felt a bit, well, let's first focus on those near-term targets. Let's make sure that we set the targets in motion internally in scope 1, in scope 2, and scope 3. What does it mean for all the different teams, for all the different departments in AAK, from sourcing and trading to procurement to also to what we sell to our customers, right? So we really said, well, let's focus on a near-term target and make it specific. Really understand if the target is achievable. Before we signed off, of course, we needed to have approval both from our executive committee as well as from the board. And we needed to have the proof points and some evidence in place that what we have in mind is going to materialize. And then it's sometimes easier to identify that for scope 1 and 2 than it is for scope 3. But as our biggest impact is happening in scope 3, we still needed to set a target related to that. The no deforestation commitment we already committed to. In 2019, we set a target for 100% no deforestation by 2025 for the key commodities included in our supply base. So that was not the issue. We already committed to that. So, and we also knew that that journey was going to contribute to our SBTi targets, which helped, of course, because we were already committed here. So overall, I would say it's going through the process, making sure the different teams and the different parts of the company are connected to it. Feel accountable, responsible, driving progress, both what we can influence directly as well as in our, let's say, a little bit more indirect value chain.
Yeah, thanks. Lars, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I can just say something short, how we are thinking in Orkla in terms of target setting. I agree totally with Caroline on short-term targets are the most important ones. In terms of SBTi, we will now apply for a target with base year 2020 and target year 2030. We chose 2020 because we did improvements since then, and we are focused on a good data quality for 2020. I think it's also important to set annual targets internally, of course, to focus really and not postpone actions. We also had a no deforestation commitment from before, so that's not a new issue in terms of flag. And then, as I said before, we have a net zero target with the target year 2045.
Thanks, Lars. And I'm just reflecting on this, and I have a challenge for everybody on the call, actually. It's been really important that SBT have changed that focus from really vague net zero targets. We had, 5 years ago, companies were climbing over each other to announce a net zero target 2040. Some were saying 2025, 2030, and quite vague ideas of what net zero meant. And actually SBT have been really critical in changing the discourse around this and saying, well, what are you going to do now? This is happening now. You have to make changes now. And so this real focus on near-term targets has been hugely important. I cannot understate the importance of that. And you get more points in CDP, you get better kind of evaluation through climate transition planning. Near-term targets are incredibly important. What my challenge is, actually, when you get beyond the 40% decarbonisation and that bit between like 100% or 80% decarbonisation, or maybe even 120% because there's removals and sequestration in your supply chain, it's that bit where you start to get into possibly finding fundamental business model changes or fundamental product changes or supply chain changes. And my challenge to everybody in the call is to get your near-term targets really battened down. Make sure you can deliver them, but also have one eye on how you're going to get to 100% and what's those changes that need to happen. Next slide, please. So the last slide has the least amount of challenges identified, but they're huge challenges, and they're almost two forks in the road. So if you can get really good supply chain data, if you know your supply chain, you know further down the supply chain in terms of where your materials or your commodities are coming from, then absolutely great. And that's the way to go. We want activity data, we want primary data. That's the preferred approach. But we know in these sectors, often commodities aren't purchased from a kind of linear supply chain where we can identify each of the points. Often a commodity is sold into a kind of, let's say, a large pot, and then we're purchasing from that pot, and we don't know where the initial kind of original farmers or foresters or the kind of growers from the supply chain. And that creates this issue of traceability. And I should say, yesterday, Science-Based Targets announced that they're going to allow market-based reporting for Scope 3. And those kind of carbon accounting geeks amongst us will know that market-based accounting has only really been allowed by the GHG protocol in Scope 2. So this is actually a huge leap, a really big change. And to a certain extent, SBT and GHG protocol are just recognizing what the market's doing. This use of certificates, for example, to demonstrate that you're purchasing something that has no deforestation or has some green credentials, that's happening in the market. And it's great from my perspective to see SBT recognizing that as a way of decarbonizing and meeting targets. So that was only announced yesterday. And I think that's a really important announcement. I'm going to hand to Lars to introduce your perspective on some of the challenges and solutions you found in terms of value chain engagement.
Next slide, please. So I will mention two interesting examples and the projects we have been running. The first one is on beef and meatballs. So as you probably know, there are quite a large amount of emissions of methane from cows. And in this project, we cooperated with beef producer Protos and Volta Green Tech, which have developed a feed additive that, in this case, reduced the enteric methane from cows by about 80%. So cows in Gotland in Sweden were fed with this algae feed additive, and then we used this meat to produce meatballs in our factory in Eslöv in Sweden, and to validate that the quality was the same and there was no change in taste and so on. So all this trial was successful. When we're looking at the climate footprint on the meatballs, we got overall a 25% reduction with this initiative. So quite an important reduction. But if you go all the way to plant-based balls, you see there to the right that's where you get, the largest reduction if you choose to eat those. So, but still, I think this is a very important initiative, and we are now looking at upscaling this because we will continue to produce a meat and dairy-based products, and we will aim to reduce the impact of those products. Next slide, please. So now we're coming to, because the previous one was about land management emissions, and in terms of carbon removals, we had one pilot project with biochar. We were working with some of our contract farmers for potatoes and beetroot. And biochar, that's something which is produced by pyrolysis. And in this case, the raw material was both agricultural residues and sewage sludge, actually. So we use those byproducts producing biochar and apply that to the fields. We also had pot trials in greenhouse and with other crops like corn, for example. And I mean, the main thing with biochar is that it's a carbon sink. I mean, it's very stable, so it will not, it will stay in that form for a very long time, hundreds or maybe 1,000 years. And this trial didn't show any negative effects on the plant, so it was successful in that sense. And in addition, there are potentially other benefits like reducing the nutrient leakage from the fields and also increasing the resistance to drought because the biochar holds the water better in the soil. And again, it's about upscaling to get a better, I mean, larger effect of these kinds of initiatives. Next slide, please. So I think one very important message for me is that you need to work cross-functionally with Scope 3. And we have worked in a team with innovation, procurement, and marketing and sales, because all functions can contribute to improving in Scope 3. And working then both upstream together with suppliers, as shown in these examples, but also downstream with your customers and with the end consumers, because we need to get the consumers to choose sort of the climate smart products to a larger extent. Yeah. Next slide.
Fantastic. So
And
I think,
can I add something on the value chain engagement? Because I think
yeah, please do.
That is a really crucial factor. Obviously, if you're not a producer of raw material, then of course you need to engage your suppliers, but also work on specific projects together with customers, so that in our case, so that we cover the whole supply chain and that we really focus on okay, what are the initiatives that we are able to support? Where can we do some joint investments, collaboration work in order to initiate reduction initiatives? And that's not easy, but it's and it takes a little bit of a more longer term approach as well, because you won't see the results immediately, obviously, but it's definitely the right thing to do when it comes down to flag.
Fantastic, thank you. And I really like this, the perspective you're both bringing on this. And I again want to throw in a challenge here, and that is there's so many opportunities in the supply chain. So when we're hopefully talking to our suppliers, we're looking at that as a route to potentially new business, new opportunities, new ways of working. Okay, just a couple of minutes, I think, each then, Carolina and Lars. I'll hand to Carolina first and then to Lars. Just in terms of your looking at the different maturity levels you're on, different kind of stages you're at in terms of your journey, what are the key takeaways in terms of flag, SBTI and target setting?
Yeah, for me and for us, I think it's you cannot optimize for perfection, I would say. You need to get started and also accept that things will change on the journey. I think, Shane, you called it an iterative learning process. It is indeed like that. It's not like financial numbers, they're good or bad. Methodologies change, which sometimes information changes, which also means that sometimes you need to adapt your baseline calculations. But of course, in the end, it's about the general direction of travel, and we need to keep the target in mind and the impact of the joint targets, I would say. Why are we doing this all together? That would be my 2 sentences on key takeaways.
Thank you. And Lars?
Yeah, I can only agree with you, Caroline. I think, we shouldn't let all the data work and administration stop us taking action now. And it will never be perfect. We will have to work on improving data quality always. And I think my other main takeaway is this with the value chain engagement, and really to work with different partners, suppliers, customers, but also other experts and universities and so on, to find new innovations and solutions for the future. So yeah, we are engaged in very many research programs to really be in the forefront there.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying here, Lars. On a couple of occasions, you've looked at the kind of value chain and the stakeholders you're engaging in a much broader sense. You know, so there's internal stakeholders. You're talking about the sustainability department, getting the innovation department involved, getting the finance department. So those internal stakeholders, and now you're looking at the kind of research establishment. So it's not just the kind of linear kind of supply chain in the traditional sense. We need to kind of broaden our mindset. So it's a really important point. Thank you. Okay, sometimes when we do webinars, there's not many questions, but Leonie, I think we've done okay.
We have, and we've got some time. We have 16 questions. I'm not sure that we're going to get to all of them, but let's see how we go. I'm going to start with the most upvoted one on where did you find the flag emission factors? Is there anyone of our panelists would like to take that?
Yeah, I can just say that we chose a company called How Good, and they have a data platform called Lattice. So that's the main source of emission factors we will now use for Scope 3 Category 1.
Thanks, Lars. And I think also, Shane, in the brief, we do point to some potential sources, I think.
Yeah, and I'll hand over also to Caroline, because I'm curious which factors you guys are using as well. But there we've signposted a couple of the big databases, the most prominent ones, but also signposted the massive list of tools and databases listed with the GHG protocol, which is actually a little bit overwhelming in terms of a starting point. So keen to get Carolina and Lars's perspective on this in terms of which databases they found most useful.
Yeah, and that was obviously recommended to us by our partner consultant that we work with. So I think we've been working with AgriFootprint, EcoInvent databases for Scope 3, but we are also in the process of collecting more primary data. But that will then have an impact of, if those data are really changing, then we might need to do a rebaselining. So it's a bit dependent on where we are in the journey right now. But there are good databases out there that you can use, as long as you're able to explain the methodology and the choice of the database, then aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol, I would say. That's an important one. Yeah,
thanks, Caroline. Our next most popular question is, can you give an example on how you have segregated flag and non-flag emissions? Lars or Caroline?
Yeah, I can give an example. So, for example, in our palm supply chain, flag emissions are all connected to the growing of the palm at the plantation. And the non-flag emissions, in our case, are connected to further processing the palm at the origin refinery and mills. So it is connected to crushing, to let's say the processing activities, and that makes flag or non-flag. Flag is really connected to the forest, land, and agricultural part, where non-flag is connected to the processing part. And that is, of course, also a difficult one to implement, right? We have set a target for non-flag as well. But it means that we need to work together with our suppliers to invest in, to co-invest in certain solutions like methane capturing solutions at their processing facilities. So that also requires a cross-value chain approach and investments. That is potentially something where investors also could play a role by providing and allocating funds that could help these kind of initiatives mature.
Thank you. I'll move on to our next question. We have 5 upvotes, so it's quite popular. It's if our current greenhouse gas inventory includes land emissions embedded in the emission factors, is it adequate to disaggregate the emission factors used into fossil and land emissions to develop a flag greenhouse gas inventory? Anyone want to take that question?
Just a quick comment, first of all, it's adequate if you are doing it in a relatively accurate way. I mean, what's not described in the question is how you're going to disaggregate them. If you've got a data set that is split out in its kind of the way the data set has been put together, and you can see those the way that those emission factors have been calculated and make that disaggregation, then it is adequate to make you know, it's required, in fact, under SBT to make that disaggregation. If that's not clear in terms of the emissions factor, then you know, I'd be keen to understand from Lars and Caroline, have you on occasions used estimates in terms of disaggregation, you know, kind of proxy data, or have you then preferred to go to the supply chain? You know, it's almost like a hierarchy. Go to the supply chain and try and get primary data. If you can't do that, maybe get better emission factors that can disaggregate. If you can't do that, then maybe use an estimate if you can justify how you estimated that disaggregation.
Well, I didn't fully maybe understand the question, but I mean, it's a challenge to get suppliers now to provide segregated data directly to us. So I think we need to work on that. So we will use this database to start with, as I mentioned, which covers the databases that Caroline mentioned as well. So, but I don't know if the question is about that is a fossil element in the flag as well for the agricultural part, which is sort of included, like it's all the farm level emissions are there. So that, Shane, maybe you know.
Yeah, no, I think the question wasn't totally clear, but there is this complexity around disaggregation of emissions. It has to be done, and you've got to find the most credible way to do it, I think, is the simplistic answer.
I think we've got time for just one more question. Again, I'm going to go with the most upvoted. Can you cover the deforestation science-based target commitment by complying with the EU level deforestation legislation? Are these two aligned? Caroline or Lars, are you able to take that, or Shane?
Well, the EU deforestation regulation has a cutoff date of 2020 in terms of deforestation happening after 2020. For SBTI, if I'm correct, the cutoff date is 2015. So there is a disconnect here, but it depends on, of course, the definitions and the methodologies used. But the complying with the EUDR does not necessarily immediately make you comply with SBTI.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to move on. Thanks, Caroline, for taking that. So thanks for all the questions. We're not going to get to them all, but I will give you an email at the end, and you can send them to me, and I can send them out to the different panelists and see if we can get some answers for you. Just a reminder that you can download the briefs, the brief series, and look at the webinar recordings on this website. So please take a look. There's a lot more detail behind what Shane shared and our panelists. We'll be running an upcoming webinar series in May and June on some hot topics around climate, market-based accounting mechanisms, avoided emissions and the voluntary carbon market, and value chain mitigation. And also finally, for companies of all levels, we run a multi-month learning program where we have on-demand content and we meet consultants and have peer exchange. It's the Climate Ambition Accelerator. We're setting companies up to set science-based targets or to progress their science-based target work. So please get in touch with one of us if you'd like to learn more about that, where it's open for registrations now. And finally, there's my email, and I can, as I said, send questions out to Shane, Lars and Caroline and see if we can get answers. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much for your contribution and for the great format of the interactive format today. So yeah, Shane, is there anything you'd like to say to wrap it up? We're over time, I see, but...
Yeah, I also want to thank UNGC. Your kind of content is always straight on point. Just the list of things that you said you're going to be looking at is totally the things that our clients are grappling with. So once again, you really kind of get to the point and really provide a great resource for corporates out there. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.